One city, 5 stories.
He was really an icon. He was a music impresario.
Birthday to you. Now that's jazz.
Some of my earliest memories are of the jam sessions that my dad would have. And the house would be full of musicians and music and noise and craziness. So that would be before kindergarten.
Listeners, not talkers. And that's what you get nowadays in a lot of different clubs. You get a lot of talking, a lot of bickering, a lot of arguing, and you're not really appreciating and or hearing the artists as they are.
You didn't have the prejudices amongst musicians that you didn't find that very much. Because I mean, we all loved the same type of thing.
6 OPS students, 2 weeks, and 5 interviews in the hopes of helping to tell the story of jazz and North Omaha through film. Our goal was to work as a team to research and to help preserve the history of this community. We toured North Omaha, did archival research, and conducted interviews with people who lived and experienced the area's rich history. The program asks us to make invisible histories visible. But as we started digging into the past, we discovered that it wasn't invisible, just hiding, waiting to be rediscovered and to tell its story.
The subject of jazz for this program really caught my eye, so I really wanted to join. And if I joined, I would have learned more about jazz and also more of the jazz history in Omaha.
I know nothing about jazz. I hope I learn about what the history of jazz is, and I'm super excited to be in the to make a documentary.
I wanted to learn about the North Omaha jazz and learn about the technology.
I joined the program because the topic was jazz, and I feel like jazz is soulful music that has to do with emotion, and it makes me feel connected to what I'm learning.
I wanted to learn more about Omaha's culture and why jazz was so popular in the 40s and 50s.
Joining Making Invisible Histories Visible, I knew the topic was Omaha music. So I just really wanted to know what Omaha did to music and why it was so special, what happened here.
Jazz as a style of music has roots in slavery when communicating was not allowed. They overcame this by making sounds with their body. This sound evolved in New Orleans in the early 1900s as a way to show the passion of the African American community and give a voice to the voiceless.
The creation of jazz was a culmination of many different elements and evolutionary pieces of music at the turn of the century. Jazz fused traditional African drumming with blues, gospel, big band, and ragtime into a new experience that was democratic, passionate, expressive, technical, sophisticated, and free.
But then somewhere you would solo and you go, that solo and that creativity within the structure of the song is what made jazz a new and great phenomenon.
Well, it was important because I liked it. So, you know, I mean, it was the music that I really enjoyed. It just hit me in the heart. I loved it. And so music was everywhere, you know. And of course, I was too young for clubs, but I could listen to it on the radio. And so that's how I got involved in playing, you know, just listening to the various groups on the radio and trying to learn how to play the trumpet.
By the 1950s, the jazz scene in North Omaha was hitting its peak. More and more clubs began to open, and both jazz and North Omaha were thriving.
Omaha was one of the key cities in the development of jazz in the nation. Omaha.
Oh man, it was just like magic. I mean, the community was so alive, you know, when the musicians came through.
It's a wonderful community. We had our own everything. We had our own movie theaters because we could not go downtown. We had our own taxi cabs. We had our own pharmacists. We had all within the basic boundaries of North Omaha.
Back in the day, there were at least 22 bars from 24th and Hamilton to 24th and Spencer.
Jazz here was one of the mainstays, and the reason I say that is because we had Allen's Showcase, and we used to have all the great artists come there.
Allen's Showcase was opened in 1950 by Paul Allen to bring in and promote local and national jazz musicians. It was a family-owned business and operated until its closing in 1992. It was a staple within the jazz community.
Allen's Showcase down on 24th and Lake was a place that everyone played. My dad, Preston Love, Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Chick Corea, Stanley Clark. I played there, so that's one place I can tell you about. It's still standing. It was a chicken place recently. Small club, but it had the vibe, you know what I'm saying? Everybody played there.
This is where they got their start, a lot of them. He brought in names like James Brown, Wilson Pickett, Fats Domino, B.B. King. All of these people came through Omaha and stopped at the showcase. He would find out the schedule of the musicians. They might be traveling east or west, and he would find out their schedule, and if they were near Omaha, say they were in Minneapolis or in Denver, he would find their schedule, and on their travel, he would ask them to stop in Omaha, and when they stopped, he booked them at the showcase.
Stevie Wonder might be laying on my couch going, or the Temptations might have been taking a shower in my room. Or Smokey Robinson could have been playing cards with my mother.
It became the hot spot in North Omaha. Musicians from everywhere came to the showcase. And then there was a young man named Buddy Miles who was a drummer. And he cut his teeth at Allen Showcase. His father had a band, and so he sometimes played with his father's band. So one night he happened to be in the showcase, and Wilson Pickett was on the stage. And for some reason or other, the drummer walked off the stage and up and quit the band. So there was a little chaos for a minute. They were wondering, what are we going to do? Well, Wilson Pickett, after a while, took the mic, and he said to the audience, "Is there anybody here that knows how to play drums?" Well, guess who was in the audience? Buddy Miles. He jumped up on the stage, and it's history.
We consistently ask the question, what is unique about jazz in Omaha? And we consistently received the same answer. Jazz musicians in Omaha were not in it for the money or the fame. These musicians played jazz because it held a special place in their heart.
Because they studied it, but they loved it. And what we had in those days is we had the love of music. Nowadays you have the money of music, which puts a whole different spin on it.
How many records you sell, and if you get a hit record, has nothing to do with the quality of the music. Nothing. Nothing. Especially now, but even then.
Racial inequalities existed outside the North Omaha jazz scene between performers and the audience. African Americans could perform for white audiences, but were not allowed to eat, drink, or socialize with them.
Even though we played in most of the clubs, the black bands, but the black people couldn't go in the clubs. See, when you had a black band at a club, you couldn't. It was patronage was for white only, but they had a black band. My relatives or my friends or blacks couldn't go in the clubs.
It was different when the black entertainers came to Omaha during that time because they were not welcomed at different venues here in Omaha. So they might entertain there, But when it came to a place to stay overnight or for the weekend, they had to stay at either somebody's house or some hotels in Omaha that were called black hotels.
And what they did, the owners of the clubs, what they would do, they'd usually give you maybe a fifth of whiskey or a pint of whiskey when you come in to the club to work. And the reason for that, when we take our intermission, they didn't want us to mingle with the guests. See, the guests would want us to come to the tables and this and that and the other and sit down and talk with them. And the owners did not want that. And so they gave us that so we could go down in the basement and fix our own drinks. And that's the way it was. Count Basie and those big bands at that particular time, they had the same problem. You know, they could play, but they didn't want them to mingle, you know, with the guests. The day that the war was over, the Hastings sent for the Navy band on the base at Hastings, Nebraska. They wanted us to march, and the whole town was just parading down the street. And we had marched for a couple of hours, you know, in the hot sun. And after we got through, there was a drugstore on the corner that he hadn't closed his store. So we went in there to get just something to drink, and he wouldn't serve us.
I think in a lot of ways musicianship is what allows you to cross a lot of different boundaries and stuff. That's the only way I can describe that.
White, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Jewish, or whatever, they all came to the showcase, and they were like one family. They didn't discriminate against color when it came to playing music. They were all like one family.
I'm going to have to mention Herbie Rich, because Herbie Rich is one of the greatest. When we talk about genius, I'm going to tell you what genius is. People think genius is when a person can dance or sing, or Herbie Rich could actually literally play several instruments, not pretty good, not fair, but excellent. Nowadays when we look at genius, we say, well, they're genius because they can. No. Genius is because you can do more than one thing with that. You know what I'm saying?
One show in particular at the Howard Street Tavern where he decided, well, we're going to make something up. And we composed on the spot, and it was brilliant. Just kind of, how do I put it? When you have blood relative connection and you do art and things, there's an extra level of communication that's hard to describe. Maybe some of you know it. When you do stuff with your brothers and sisters that you're into together, you can kind of vibe deeper, you know what I'm saying? So this particular night, my dad said, we're just gonna make it up, just watch me. And somehow we just understood. He would start doing these motions, this and this, and then this. And we composed, and it was amazing. I wish there was a recording of it. So that's one memorable, because it was like when we were done with the song, it's like, I don't believe what we just did. It's like we just wrote a symphony. It was amazing, it was.
While jazz promoted free and open expression that created some of the greatest musical art of its time, there was a darker side to its story. Played in brothels and performed by some musicians who used drugs and alcohol, jazz was not immune to the pitfalls of human vice.
It's no secret that in the entertainment, music, art world, and I always lump them together, you deal with many personalities, and you deal with things like drinking and drugs, okay? So as a young boy, I was introduced to the crazy behavior of musicians.
There's one thing I'd like to say, to you, and I'd like to tell the world. Never get into drugs. Never. Not even for a try, not even to think, oh well, I can make it. I can try this and I can come through this. No, you cannot come through it. Only thing that saved me was I went to rehab. But I was ready. Most people, you had to drag them to the rehab. They didn't have to drag me. All they had to do was give me a date, October 27th. You had to be at 7 o'clock. I was there at 6:30. Don't even try, don't even think the drugs are going to make you any better, because they're not. And all you're doing is you're putting your life in the hands of the enemy. Because the enemy don't want to see us as great as we are, through our music, through our culture, through everything we do is great and wonderful. And we have to tell our children, and we have to tell everyone that can hear us, don't try something you don't need to try. Just go on and live life.
Beginning in the middle of the 20th century, jazz began to decline in Omaha. This change was spurred by a variety of factors. Desegregation helped merge different groups of people across Omaha. Businesses began to close in the area and crime was on the rise. Omaha also experienced a series of riots in the late 1960s. Participants in these riots expressed their anger through violence and the destruction of North Omaha buildings.
I can remember seeing the decline of local jazz musicians being able to get good paying jobs in my childhood. So even as we were approaching the 70s, the music business was changing locally.
Ugh, wow. There's nothing down there. It's empty. We used to have so many stores and stuff in North Omaha. It's nothing down there.
You know, I hope it comes back, but this is my perspective. Jazz used to be relevant. It was a living voice of people. As times changed and technology came in, also in my opinion, partially the disintegration of the nuclear family, especially in the black community, where dads were not around more and more, and dads weren't there to pass on, like in many cultures how dads and mothers pass on skills. I see that as a breakdown. I also see that, again, the public schools music programs breaking down, accessibility to instruments for kids. I see that as a breakdown. Why I think jazz is not quite as relevant as it was, but it might come back. It was a living thing, okay? So when all this, what I spoke about, happened, and kids didn't have access to instruments like they used to, what they had access to was record players. And so that's where hip hop and turntabling became instruments, okay? That music became the music of relevancy to the people of the time. If there's a way to connect with children learning instruments and hearing music played in a relevant life way, the way that hip hop and rock is now, I can see a resurgence of jazz. But I think that's part of the problem, is that it doesn't have a place in the home the way it used to. It seems like it's more of a novelty now. A lot of times what you actually hear on the radio when they say jazz is what they call smooth jazz, which I hate. That's not real jazz to me. So that's my opinion. I think that it needs to be relevant to the people's lives, or else it will remain dead.
I can listen to a jazz record right now that was made in 1957, and I go, wow, that's great stuff.
I really want to encourage everyone to be original and be brave to not just follow trends. We all want to be accepted. We all want to be liked by our friends. We want to be popular. But if you have something inside of you that interests you, that takes you on your own course, follow it. Be real. Be original. Don't be a follower. That's what the best music comes from people who don't follow, but who innovate.
It was, I still think it's personality. I still think it's how. I think people can read you. I think they can tell if you don't like them. And me, I love everybody. If you allow me to love you, I love you. If you don't, I'm still gonna like you and move on. I think people can read if they just open their eyes, but you have to open your eyes and you have to open your heart because you got to be able to see that there's love in everybody. You just got to pull it out. The only way you can pull it out, you can't pull it out with a frown. You got to pull it out with a smile, with love, and people can see that.
Jazz is enduring music because it's music. Synthesizer is electronic. Jazz is enduring like the classics.